Thank you so much for having me. And on behalf of all of us, thank you for organizing this fantastic workshop. I'd like to use this opportunity to talk about recent developments in financial market design. Okay, so this is a literature in which I myself participated, but I would like to cover recent advances a bit more broadly. So arguably, one of the most salient developments in financial markets research in recent years has been all the work on financial market design motivated by new data and new questions concerning market fragmentation and imperfect competition. We've seen parallel developments for other industries. Data on market concentration and spatial data on market fragmentation continues to be reported for virtually every sector of the economy. Production, labor markets, international trade, monetary policy, and other markets which have traditionally been analyzed using competitive models of markets which are centralized in some sense. For financial markets, we've known, at least since the mid-1980s, this is when individual trade-level data became available, that the presence of large institutional investors is significant in the financial industry, in terms of trading volume, as well as the ability to innovate and access information. Institutional investors routinely estimate their price impact using statistical models called market impact models. And the trading costs associated with price impact continue to dominate all of the explicit trading costs, including commission fees, order processing fees, and brokerage fees. A bit more recently, new data, particularly data coming out of the financial crisis, has highlighted the extent to which trading is fragmented or decentralized. Essentially, all financial assets are traded in a variety of coexisting trading venues of various kinds, often for the same traders and assets. It will be impossible in this talk to give justice to all of the ways in which market fragmentation matters, but let me mention a few facts. In the past couple of decades, the number of alternative trading venues outside of traditional open exchanges has increased several-fold. Okay, so if we look at the assets listed on the New York Stock Exchange, these are some of the most transparent liquid assets. Today, less than a quarter of trade in its listed stocks is executed by NYSE. The remaining volume is created by the 15 other public exchanges, where public refers to the fact that all traders can participate there. Over 30 private exchanges, right? Think of dark pools, liquidity pools. These have participation restricted mostly to large institutional investors, and over 200 dealer networks. I'm essentially giving you a complete description of the top of the equity markets in the US today, but this is representative across asset classes, domestic, international, and so on, however we cut the data. We've also seen the emergence of new electronic marketplaces, which eventually came to dominate trading. And these offer different types of market clearing. Okay? For instance, a direct matching to an intermediary, trading in a dealer network, or an open exchange, but online, to different types of investors, institutional, retail, and intermediaries. To be sure, what's novel about these electronic marketplaces is now the availability of different trading arrangements to different types of traders. Goldman Sachs has always had a trading desk for large institutional investors. We used to call these markets upstairs markets. What electronic trading has brought are new technologies, new frequencies, new technologies to clear assets, and the use of artificial intelligence. All right, so in this talk, I'll focus on financial markets, but many of the same ideas and tools are relevant for other markets, including those we've seen today and during the week, particularly the markets in which traders have multi-unit valuations. Okay, so markets for electricity, spectrum, emission permits, and natural resources, wind, water, energy, and so on. I will also slightly conflate market power with market fragmentation. And this is because in a decentralized market, locally, in the relationships in which traders participate in an exchange or with a dealer, they are not negligible. They are large, regardless of the number of participants. Okay, so naturally, the fact that market power and market fragmentation are receiving renewed attention in the literature around the same time is not quite coincidental. And there is a lot of interest right now in understanding the effects of market power and market fragmentation. The models of strategic behavior and fragmented markets aren't fully integrated just yet. But we do recognize that the assumption that trading is centralized, that a single market clearing applies to all traders and all assets, may be a good description of an auction, but not a market, not for most industries. We also recognize that even though many markets have a large number of participants, most of the economic activity is often due to a small group of large traders. Okay, our understanding of market concentration is improving dramatically with new data sets. So just last month, a new study came out for the Bitcoin market. You may have seen it. It was featured in the New York Times. That study reported that in the first couple of years of the existence of the Bitcoin market, most of the action was in the hands of 62 miners. And that number includes the founders of that market. All right, so one might ask, what's the nature of the effort here? The effort towards building more realistic models of fragmented markets with traders who recognize their market power, their price impact. Is it primarily computational? We know that incorporating strategic behavior, allowing for private information, or even trader heterogeneity is hard enough in models of centralized trading. Okay? With fragmented markets, all these challenges scale up, but perhaps with advanced algebra, we'll get the results we need. Well, in this talk, I would like to underscore 3 points. Decentralized market theory will be a different kind of theory compared to the theory of centralized markets. It will challenge the methods we've used, and also how much has already been done. All right. Okay, so where does the equilibrium theory of imperfectly competitive, fragmented markets stand? Well, research on strategic behavior has a long tradition in financial markets. The literature on various problems concerning private information has advanced through partial equilibrium models focused on specific markets. However, until quite recently, the equilibrium of the market as a whole and asset pricing have been studied and taught using competitive models of centralized trading with symmetric information. That's possibly with randomness, but no private information. Likewise, the literature on decentralized trading is very active right now. But it's useful to keep in mind that the effort to build rich, flexible models of decentralized financial markets really took off only in the mid-2000s. And the key paper here was Duffy, Garliano, and Peterson, Over-the-Counter Markets Econometrica 2005. Well, since then, 2 classes of models have emerged, which mathematically speaking are based on graphs, random or fixed. There isn't a canonical model of decentralized financial markets just yet. It is unclear, there should be one, given what the data is telling us about the richness of market structures and market designs out there. Still, as we are transitioning towards working with and teaching optimization methods through various models of fragmented markets, there are at least 2 classes of models through which the literature on financial market design has developed. One is based on the limit order book, which has been popular in markets in which bidders have unit demands and supplies. Another class of models for markets with large traders who have multi-unit demands, which thus allows for an explicit treatment of price impact, is based on uniform price double auctions in which traders submit price contingent demand and supply schedules. Okay, so that class is the finite market counterpart of the standard competitive model, which is also based on the uniform price and multi-unit demands. Okay, so formally, this is a class of games in which traders' strategies are not points, prices, or quantities, like they will be in the Bertrand or Cournot model, but they are functions, quantity schedules specifying quantity demanded or supply for all price realizations. I've emphasized the distinction between unit demands and multi-unit demands because we know from results going back at least to Wilson's early work that the theory of indivisible good auctions, auctions in which bidders have unit demands and supplies, does not really carry over to multi-unit environments. Okay, so this class of models is less developed. You can see that a lot is happening in this literature right now. Still, most of what we understand about equilibrium with large traders has been established in a variant of a quadratic Gaussian setting. Okay, so all traders' objectives are quadratic, and all random variables are jointly normally distributed. Now, a useful perspective might be that even competitive models with heterogeneous traders are typically analyzed using numerical methods, often heavy computational methods, and often employ a quadratic approximation. Okay, so with an additional fixed point due to strategic behavior and another one due to private information, we shouldn't really expect to rely on fully analytic characterizations going forward with general payoff functions. Now, even in this setting, advances such as incorporating trader heterogeneity, okay, so moving away from what we used to call the representative agent model, allowing for general information structures and flexible market structures have occurred only in the past decade. Nevertheless, these advances have led to a common analytic framework for static, dynamic, centralized, and decentralized markets, which one can further expand by incorporating other relevant details of market design or market structure. Okay, I'll have a slide at the end with some surveys, but let me make a couple of remarks here. Models with unit demands have tended to be more popular in decentralized market models of based on random matching, okay, in which transactions are bilateral. Models with multi-unit demands have tended to be more popular in the study of markets in which relationships are fixed rather than random and can be bilateral or occur through exchanges, private or public. The second class is where I've had an opportunity to contribute various methods with wonderful co-authors. This class has some attractive properties. For instance, what enabled this systematic analysis in static, dynamic, centralized, and decentralized markets? Very different market structures, which might comprise multiple exchanges for different traders and assets and different details of market design. Well, it was the following result. It turns out that the equilibrium conditions in games in which traders submit price contingent demand and supply schedules, again, to different exchanges for different traders and assets and different details of market design, can be equivalently represented as a fixed point in traders' price impact matrices once the problem is written in matrix form. For the intuition how that might be possible, think of an individual optimization problem of a trader in an imperfectly competitive market. Okay, the key decision of a trader concerns how much to reduce the quantity demanded or supply in response to price impact, okay, relative to what the competitive demand or supply would be. Now, the trader's price impact, which is an endogenous variable, it depends on the behavior of others, is the sufficient statistic for the decision. Okay, so hence the possibility for the equivalence. Now, of course, in more complex market structures, price impacts will be more complex objects. There will be a within exchange and a cross exchange price impact in dynamic markets. There is a within round and a cross and intertemporal price impact, but the equivalence carries over. Not only does it make the analysis much more tractable, it reduces the dimensionality of the problem and computational burden. It eliminates the need to characterize the distributions of equilibrium variables and conditional inference. Once we have the fundamentals, the endogenous price impacts are the sufficient statistics. But perhaps more importantly, some of the most pressing questions in the literature right now concern decentralized market effects, which have no centralized market counterparts, and the role of market power. Since this framework directly nests the standard centralized market model, it facilitates the identification of these effects. By no means is this an exhaustive account of the existing literature, but these two classes of models have been developed a bit more fully, and other models are related to these. Okay, so next, I would like to talk a little bit about how the focus in terms of questions has evolved in the literature, and why decentralized market theory will be different. It will be hard to overstate the importance of market power and market fragmentation for theory, design, or policy. So questions concerning market structure and the incentives of large traders have been implicit or explicit in virtually every policy debate in recent memory. The mandate to move assets traditionally traded over the counter to centralized platforms. The challenges involved in standardizing these assets to make them suitable for trading centrally. The incentives of large traders to manipulate benchmark indices, the difficulty in designing privacy-preserving mechanisms, the value of pre-trade and post-trade transparency, new technologies, new market clearing arrangements, and most recently, the weaknesses in the design of treasury markets exposed by the unprecedented disruptions during the pandemic, and last month's proposal of the chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission to eliminate intermediaries between trading platforms and retail investors. Now, these debates are far from settled, and they themselves indicate opportunities to contribute, but also a sense of urgency. Okay, so let's keep in mind that the first generation of models, which developed when some of these questions came to light, was defined as dictated by tractability for markets with a continuum of traders or a small relative to the interaction, often for a particular market structure, one asset, and symmetric information. Okay, hence also the view of market fragmentation as a friction which takes away from efficiency in the early literature. Indeed, in a policy discussion, there is still often a presumption that the centralized market is beneficial, at least for the investors. These views have evolved, and one of the contributions of the literature so far has been to qualify that presumption. We now understand that fragmented markets can be more efficient. They can improve the distribution of risk in some sense. They may help us simplify the design for market participants and be more stable. Now, as a matter of theory, the result that a fragmented market can be more efficient when traders are large should not be surprising. Okay, so let's be careful here. The key question is, and has always been, can we provide any general results which could guide the design, regulation, and illuminate the need for financial market antitrust? And as I see it, this is where some of the potentially more impactful opportunities for research arise. We have a beautiful theory of centralized market design, auction design, which has been influential in theory and in practice, to say the least. Developing the corresponding design principles for decentralized markets is very much work in progress. And these are some of the questions that keep me up at night. That part is not exactly straightforward, and part of the reason is that decentralized trading has challenged the methods we've used. Okay, so in order to appreciate that statement, let's go through some recent results illustrating the impact of market fragmentation. Okay. So to do so, let's first consider carefully what exactly the centralized market assumption entails. Okay, so let's try to think for a moment. What do we assume when we take an off-the-shelf model of centralized trading? Well, the essence of centralized trading in the standard model is not centralized or decentralized implementation in the mechanism design sense or the social choice sense, but rather that a single market clearing applies to all traders and all assets. In particular, two assumptions are implicit in the centralized market assumption. One is that trader participation in the market is complete in the following sense. Each trader trades all assets with all other investors. Naturally, this assumption has been relaxed by the large literature on decentralized trading based on random graphs, fixed graphs, and other models with limited participation. But there is at least one other assumption implicit in the centralized market assumption. Okay, so when markets are decentralized, when trading is decentralized, we need to be explicit, we as modelers need to be explicit, or the market designer needs to be explicit, or the trading protocol needs to be explicit about the types of demand schedules allowed. Okay, so let's imagine that I'm participating in a market with two exchanges, each for one asset. Okay, let's say the same asset. Should the demand I'm submitting in one exchange allow me to condition on the price from the other exchange as well? Okay, in other words, should I be submitting a fully contingent schedule, R2 to R2, with the quantity of each asset being a function of the price vector, or I should be submitting two uncontingent schedules, R to R, with the quantity of each asset being a function of the price of that asset alone. The standard textbook model of financial markets on which asset pricing is based, competitive or imperfectly competitive, assumes that schedules are fully contingent. Okay? We work with demands RK to RK when we study multi-asset market models. Now, in practice, such fully contingent schedules represent cross-asset conditioning possibilities that exist in some, but not too many trading protocols. More typically, an order placed for an asset cannot be made contingent on prices of other assets. Okay? If allowed, such cross-asset conditioning applies only to a limited number of assets. So we do actually see cross-asset conditioning in markets for spectrum, electricity, certain options, and futures markets. A pair of rules called Reg NMS and unlisted trading privileges implemented in the US equity markets more than a decade and a half ago de facto implements contingent schedules. But we do not see analogous rules in markets for other asset classes or even equity markets outside the US. Why should we care? Okay? How does the cross-asset demand conditioning matter? Let's take a closer look. So let's imagine a market with I traders and K assets, okay, organized as K exchanges, each for one asset. All traders participate in all these exchanges. Okay? So the participation in the market is complete. It's symmetric. All traders trade all assets. But now they submit uncontingent schedules. Okay, so what is the significance of that? The assumption of fully contingent schedules in the standard model implies that the demands and supplies of all traders for all assets must be aggregated jointly to even determine the vector of market clearing prices and trades. Okay, the assumption of fully contingent schedules requires joint clearing. So part of what makes decentralized trading different is that assets clear independently rather than jointly. In dynamic markets, this difference in market clearing would apply in any trading round. Okay, so now that we've identified two assumptions implicit in centralized market models, let's take a look at the second one. Okay, the first one has been studied extensively in the literature. So how does the fact that assets clear independently rather than jointly matter? Well, in a recent project joined with Ji Hyun, who is now at UCL, we show that decentralized trading in this sense gives rise to new financial products and new market clearing technologies, which would be neutral if well-defined at all, if trading were centralized. Okay, so what are these new financial products? Well, think of synthetic products whose payoffs derive from the payoffs of other assets. Okay, ETFs, ETPs, or proper derivatives, which are all redundant in the standard model based on the contingent demands. The substantive result here is that when assets clear independently, spanning doesn't hold. Okay, the term spanning has become part of the financial jargon, but the usual linear algebraic intuition applies. Okay, so in the standard model of financial markets, which is based on fully contingent demands, again, competitive or imperfectly competitive, the introduction of a new product whose payoff lies in the linear span of the payoffs of the traded assets is neutral. It does not change the trader's payoffs. Asset diversification depends only on the asset span, but not the asset structure. The markets for synthetic products are among the most active markets. In practice, traders choose new products, these synthetic products or new technologies, either to improve information, to hedge events they couldn't hedge before, or to improve liquidity. Regulators often classify derivatives markets as particularly challenging. This is in part because of the difficulty in assessing the scope for innovating new products and their impact. Once again, in the standard model, such products are redundant. Okay, most business schools, I believe all business schools, teach derivative pricing using one of the following two methods. One assumes the existence of a replicating portfolio. That is, it assumes that we can price new products to be introduced in markets using linear combinations of the prices of the assets that are already traded. Okay, that is, it assumes that these products are redundant. Okay, the other method endows a market with an exogenous demand for a derivative product. Okay, but if we want to understand which products will and which should be introduced in markets, as a function of market characteristics, we would need an equilibrium model of non-redundant derivatives. And once we acknowledge that it is not the case that asset markets clear jointly, the otherwise standard model becomes such a framework. Derivatives are generally non-redundant, okay, except under special conditions, and they are payoff relevant because they affect information and liquidity. Now, the fact that independent market clearing savors the link between equilibrium payoffs and asset span has other consequences. Spanning is the foundation for asset pricing, the way we teach it and the way we apply it. Before I mention these other consequences, we can now ask, what are the welfare implications of decentralized trading, of decentralized market designs which allow independent market clearing and these new financial products? Well, to be sure, such designs may or may not be conducive to efficiency. Okay, so derivatives can lower welfare, but one can show that in markets with any traders and assets, it's always possible to design financial products with which a market which clears all products and assets independently is at least as efficient as the centralized market, which clears all assets jointly, in which these products will be neutral. Okay, so there are two results here. One is that we can always reproduce the centralized market outcome by introducing these new financial products. Okay, we can reproduce it with simpler schedules. So the centralized market welfare gives a lower bound on what's possible in welfare terms. And second, under general conditions, we can do strictly better. The core intuition here is that when traders' demands cannot condition on the prices of all other assets, traders need to bid in expectation. They need to submit demands based on expected prices or trades. Right? So independent market clearing introduces inference error. Now, a recurrent theme in market models with large traders is that inference, in this case across assets, not traders, it changes the trader's price impact and their demand behavior. Okay? So we can now ask, why can a market with multiple trading venues that clear independently be at least as efficient as the centralized market, which clears assets jointly. Why wouldn't providers, let traders, condition their demands on the prices from other venues? Well, doing so can reduce, in fact, eliminate the inference error. Well, if the market were competitive, if the traders were price takers, the fully contingent demand, the centralized trading, would indeed be the most efficient market structure. But when traders are large, changes to market clearing also transform traders' price impact within and across exchanges, and these changes to liquidity can countervail any welfare losses due to information error. Here's another class of designs that become possible with decentralized trading. Oops, getting ahead of myself. And here's yet another consequence of the failure of spawning. Okay, so suppose that synthetic products are not available, okay, or they are not allowed. We know that pension funds are not allowed to trade certain types of derivatives. We can still ensure that markets with multiple venues are at least as efficient as the centralized market by letting providers innovate on market clearing technologies for multiple assets. Okay, so there is a lot of interest in the industry right now in designing algorithms for clearing multiple assets. Okay, and traditionally, these assets have cleared independently. Okay, so these days, electronic trading platforms increasingly allow traders to condition their demands for an asset on prices, quantities, and characteristics of other assets, much like in a contingent model, but locally. In a separate project, we study a new market design problem, the design of market clearing for markets with multiple assets, okay, which encompasses joint clearing of all assets, okay, the standard in theory, but less so in practice, contingent model, independent clearing of all assets, okay, the uncontingent demands, and many other possibilities that become available once we dispense with the assumption that all assets must clear jointly. Okay, so traders can now submit demands that are contingent on any subset of assets. We don't need to require that conditioning must be mutual across assets. So there are many questions we need to answer. Can efficient design rely on technology that clears all assets independently? Should we prioritize clearing of some assets? And if so, how to process data, price data for other assets? Can it ever be optimal to delay disclosure of price data or withhold the disclosure altogether, for instance, to preserve privacy? Notice that these questions are relevant at any unit of time, okay, at any frequency. Even at the highest frequencies, the trading volume is such that providers right now are working on designing priority in market clearing across traders and assets. Okay, so in terms of results, once again, one can show that markets with multiple venues, which do not clear all assets jointly, can be more efficient than both the contingent design and independent market clearing. Okay, but there is a new question here. By allowing sophisticated preference expression over many assets, and thus creating linkages among traders' demands, these market clearing technologies are assuming the traditional role of financial products, okay, by affecting liquidity and welfare. So can these new market clearing technologies reproduce the equilibrium effects of synthetic products, or vice versa? Well, in fact, it seems that derivatives offer an additional degree of freedom. We can choose the ways with which we bundle the asset payoffs. Right? So it appears that a more appropriate question should be, can derivatives substitute, can synthetic products substitute for innovation in market clearing technology? We give two results. Okay? First, neither instrument can generally mimic the effects of the other state by state. Either one can dominate in welfare terms. Okay? So synthetic products and new market clearing technologies constitute separate instruments in financial market design, and they should be regulated separately. We also show that if one compares the effects of synthetic products and market clearing technologies for multiple assets, derivatives lead to a riskier distribution of payoffs and welfare. Okay, so a policy which cannot rely on detailed information about traders' holdings, sometimes this information is available, but if it's not, such policy might in fact favor innovation in market clearing technology over synthetic products. So once again, all these results can be understood by looking at equilibrium price impacts, which are the sufficient statistic. Synthetic products, designs that allow traders to submit demands for asset bundles. And new market clearing technologies, designs that allow traders to submit demands for asset subsets, have very different effects on traders' inference, price impact, and demand behavior. Now, speaking of bundles, these two instruments, these two classes of instruments define package auction designs for markets with multiple units. Okay, and we can push these ideas a bit more, right? So we can have demands for asset bundles, demands for asset subsets. We can allow for both types of package betting in a single market. They won't be neutral. In fact, there are synergies or trade-offs between them. We can also define asymmetric package betting auctions. So in the sense that if demand for asset 1 is contingent on the price of asset 2, the converse need not be the case. The literature on combinatorial design has given support to full package bidding in markets in which bidders' demands feature complementarities. Now, these results qualify these design recommendations for markets with multiple units. Okay, full package bidding is indeed efficient if traders are price takers in large markets, but not otherwise. It is generally efficient to limit the packages on which bidders are allowed to bid. And let me mention one other design, combinatorial design, which was recently proposed simultaneously by a couple of papers. So Eric Budish, Peter Crampton, Pete Kyle, Menali, and David Malik, who might be in this building, and another paper by Shitong Wang and co-authors. I believe she's somewhere here. They introduced the following idea. Instead of letting bidders bid on predefined bundles, okay, defined in the same way for all traders, let's let bidders bid on personalized bundles. Let's let bidders define the bundles on which they want to bid, and then clear the market asset by asset. Okay, there are many more possibilities here once we relax the assumption that assets must clear jointly. But in this last part, let me highlight why decentralized trading has challenged the methods we've used. Okay, so to begin, it weakens the role of spanning, on which many results in asset pricing rely. The spanning methods are also used in counterfactual policy analysis because they have provided us with a method to characterize the implied uncertainty, the payoff relevant uncertainty in a model through the implied state space over which state contingent prices are defined. Right? So when we evaluate the effects of policies or changes to market design, we only need to look at the effects of these prices. When spanning doesn't hold, these methods aren't helpful. So there is a need to develop new methods for evaluating policy counterfactuals, for pricing new contracts, new designs, and new market structures. It is unlikely that we'll be able to rely on some decentralized market counterparts of these methods. And the reason is that when traders are large, the implied representation of risk depends on traders' price impacts, which are endogenous variables. Okay, so this representation can no longer be invariant to changes in market design or market structure. Well, we can always use structural methods. Decentralized market design will also limit the scope for recursive analysis of dynamic models of markets. Why? Modeling decentralized markets requires, by definition, that we relax various symmetry assumptions on traders' objectives, the market structure, so who trades with whom, the information structure, who has access to what types of data. However, heterogeneity makes recursive methods inapplicable in dynamic models of markets, at least with standard strategies used in markets. And the reasons can be gleaned from the theory of dynamic oligopoly. In dynamic models of markets with heterogeneous traders, price assigns asymmetric weights to traders' behavior and signals, which change over time. So consequently, the state variables become endogenous in the Markovian. The entire history matters and cannot generally be summarized by the last round's outcome. There is a curse of dimensionality. These problems have long been understood, at least since the paper by Rob Towson in 1979. And they are the reason why the literature on dynamic markets, financial markets, but more generally dynamic oligopoly, has studied environments that are symmetric in some sense. Right? So we either assume that traders are symmetric and private information is Markovian. That's perhaps the most common assumption in empirical work, or that prices are fully revealing in each round, okay? That prices fully reveal private information, which requires a joint symmetry assumption on the markets, on the information structure, or that private information is disclosed fully after every round. Or we focus on stationary equilibria, yet another joint symmetry assumption. Under each of these assumptions, inference effects are essentially static. Trading decisions can be dynamic, but inference is static. Another approach, popular in computational work, has relaxed the assumptions about the state variables that players need to keep track of. This led to the notion of the oblivious equilibrium and versions of self-confirming equilibrium. But there's a need to develop new methods and models for markets with dynamic trading and dynamic inference, which would accommodate the relevant heterogeneity. These models would possibly be non-recursive ones. Incidentally, the approach to transform an equilibrium fixed point into a fixed point in traders' price impact matrices allows a solution to this problem. Okay, so in yet another project, we show that this approach can accommodate no Markovian state variables and history dependence. Moving on, in some problems, for instance, in much empirical work, it is essential to account for the endogeneity of the market structure. In a specific application, we might know enough about the market to only have to tackle a relatively simpler problem, which maps into a two-sided matching setting. But at a high level, the question of endogenous market structure defines a matching theoretic problem to which a solution remains open. Okay, as we all know, the theory of the matching theory based on stability accommodates well environments, games, or markets in which contracts or agreements are substitutable. We can do more in environments around substitutes and perhaps even more in large markets. And so many people in this room have contributed to our thinking. In a recent paper with Nathan Yoder, who is somewhere there, remember his name, Nathan Yoder, we show that matching theory works well in environments in which all contracts are complementary. Right? So these two assumptions, substitutability and complementarity of all contracts, induce a monotonicity of the fixed point operator. It's a different operator in each case, which is not guaranteed otherwise. Okay? But providing general predictive results for endogenous market structures based on stability will require a theory that can accommodate substitutable agreements alongside complementary ones. Providing a solution to this problem will also open the door for matching theory to other markets. And lastly, when traders are large, allocation is never really efficient, not even in dynamic markets, as long as the gains from trade are renewed. Okay, so the focus on imperfect competition has shifted our attention in welfare analysis from efficiency, right? How do we design efficient mechanisms, to how the surplus is distributed or redistributed among market participants through market design. The need for market design to embrace values other than revenue and efficiency has been recognized in non-financial markets. There was a workshop at this conference devoted entirely to this topic. However, in financial markets, any type of regulation to market design, market structure, or transparency also involves a decision about a redistribution of risk. Right? Which traders will be exposed to which types of shocks, how the risk is to be shared among market participants. Okay, the observation I'm making is very simple, but at the same time, a systematic analysis of redistributive effects of financial market design would really complete our understanding of how market design matters. This question also provides another opportunity for market design in practice. Imperfect competition and all the inefficiencies it induces motivates the use of the tools of market design for redistributive purposes. I guess I should stop here. This is an extraordinary time for anybody who's interested in markets and market design. Thank you. Did I go over time? Can you bring my slides back? Oh, I just wanted to show some surveys here. Yep. Here are some surveys. Financial markets, recent surveys, empirical, theoretical. I can talk more.
So I have a general question about the effect of synthetic products versus effect of fragmentation of markets. So like just in like a bang world, like which one has the more impact on efficiency? Like if I, for example, say for whatever political reasons or institutional reasons, no synthetic products that include cross-market trading, which is now in control of like the traders, while every market operator says like, no, I want my slice of a pie there. So if I ban that, what is the impact on total efficiency of the market? Versus if I think about, I don't know how to formulate it exactly, but like if I think about centralized market versus decentralized markets without synthetic products, is it clear which one has the more? You said like it depends which one, they're complementaries. So that's the generic question.
Right. But in a general environment, I mean, the answer will be it depends. Unless you give me a specific environment. If you give me a specific environment, you describe the traders and the joint distribution of asset payoffs, I can certainly tell you what happens. But more generally, that depends. And we sort of know that this is the answer, and the difficulty is in coming up with these general design principles. So perhaps in a few years, we will know what the answer is and what these general principles are. But this is one of the questions right now that is open. I mean, that observation, we could see it in the previous presentation as well, even though the setting was very different.
What I find interesting here is like financial markets are very specific because, so for example, like what I was thinking about when you were talking about these things, like what we see as like really fragmented markets is actually digital ad markets, and there are no synthetic products there, right? So it's like a clear example of just the opposite from what we see here in financial markets which are riddled with synthetic products, right? So like I guess that's
absolutely.
I don't quite get what is the driving force. Like my intuition would be heterogeneity of both demand and supply in the ad markets pushes in one direction, while even though the assets are heterogeneous, there's still kind of a replacement. Like everybody wants more money. So there is like this, in financial markets, there is some sort of coordination mechanism in a way. I don't know where that's the, so like I wonder
your conjecture is spot on. Heterogeneity is the key determinant, right? But interestingly enough, even if all asset payoffs are complementary, so let's say they are symmetric payoff complements or symmetric payoff substitutes, either fully contingent design or the uncontingent design can be optimal, depending on the characteristics of traders' portfolios. Okay, so even in this setting, the answer is it depends. But otherwise, heterogeneity is the key determinant. And like you observe, it's not just that we need to take into account synthetic products when regulating these markets. Right? A part of the insight here is that innovation in trading technology can somehow, at least partially, substitute for innovation in synthetic products. So if we prohibit traders from trading synthetic products, if they're creative enough about market-hidden technology, they can reverse some of these effects.
Thank you. Very interesting. I'm not really coming from finance, more classical mechanism design. I'm wondering in many of these combinatorial exchanges what the role of complexity is. So you're making statements, you can replicate whatever you can do in the fully contingent setting. And one thing that is known, if you have some complementarities in combinatorial auctions, you run into problems that is actually very, very hard to bid into these markets. And yeah, I'm wondering whether there is theory already making the claim which of these designs are actually easier to play if you take a step away from assuming unlimited computational power in portfolio choice, given certain market configurations.
Can you hear me? This is a very interesting question. A lot of people are asking about it. These results haven't yet been developed. I guess they are waiting for you to be developed. And there is another session. The next session, I believe, is on complexity. So perhaps we'll be inspired by some ideas there. I have some more thoughts, but they are too raw to be voiced in front of this audience. Happy to talk. This reduction of the fixed point problem to one into traders' pricing impacts is extremely helpful to think about the complexity issue. Okay, let's hear more about complexity then.
Yeah, so we'll move to the next session. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.